Hello and a warm welcome to the Open Treasury podcast, your go-to source for the latest news and analysis in corporate cash and treasury management. This show is brought to you by CTMfile.com and the Treasury News Network, where treasury professionals learn and share the information that matters most. I am your host Pushpendra Mehta. Joining me today is Ben Poole, writer at CTMfile. Welcome back, Ben, to another episode of the Open Treasury podcast.
Thanks, Push. It's great to be here.
We truly appreciate your time and insights as we explore critical topics shaping the landscape of corporate treasury management and beyond. In today's edition, we shall discuss 4 topics, namely where treasurers have influence, companies enjoy revenue growth and financial stability, UK pound unlikely to regain its pre-Brexit levels, North American fund managers concerned about foreign exchange volatility because of the US election, and finally, European payment fraud hits 6.3 billion euros over 18 months. Our audience can watch videos on the CTMfile YouTube channel and explore insightful articles, interviews, and industry roundups on CTMfile.com, either by visiting the website or by following the links provided in our show notes. Let's commence today's discussion with our first story, which is about treasurers who gain greater organizational influence, drive enhanced performance. Treasury is considered as the steward of an organization's liquidity and is also thought of as the superintendent of payment security. Additionally, Treasury has become an integral component in various organizational functions, from being crucial in M&A transactions to influencing decisions on supply chain dynamics and commodity risks. Geopolitical conflicts, economic uncertainty, supply chain disruptions, impact of rising inflation and high interest rates have thrust corporate treasurers into the spotlight over the last few years. As they step out in the limelight and are tasked with greater strategic responsibilities, enterprises that are empowering Treasury to play an increasingly influential role are achieving higher growth and financial stability. Corroborating this assertion are some of the findings explored in the survey report Why Treasurers Influence Matters, a payments intelligence and city collaboration, which states that treasurers are on the front lines of keeping a company financially healthy. When they have greater influence and integration within their organizations, they can drive improved performance. Ben, do you concur with the key findings of the survey that companies where treasurers hold considerable influence enhance their performance metrics? And if so, what are the benefits that will likely accrue to corporations that enable treasurers to gain greater organizational influence, as well as involve them in cross-departmental collaboration?
Thanks, Push. It's a great write-up, I think, so anyone listening to this should go and check out the piece that you put up on CTMfile.com. I think the research touches on that vital trend that we've spoken about a lot in terms of the increasingly strategic role of the treasurer, being able to be more proactive in that sense within their organisation, which, as you say, kind of has its roots back probably to the global financial crisis, I suppose, where Treasury played an essential role in navigating their companies through that really uncertain time. And in a number of cases, that led to Treasury getting a seat at the table to kind of influence overall business strategy along with senior management. And one of the reasons that Treasury is able to do that, is in that position, is its connection with other parts of the business. You know, if you think about departments like sales or procurement, all of that data revolving around cash flowing in and out of the business, that can all be consolidated in the Treasury department and kind of can help give the treasurer that complete picture. They're in that position to help all these different areas of the business as well by analysing the data and seeing, you know, perhaps how relatively small changes in their behaviour could add some significant value to the business. I think getting that data plan in place to get that full visibility, that's a fundamental part of it. And then using technology to kind of crunch the numbers, but also increasingly these days sort of interrogate it and kind of ask for suggestions based on those outputs. I do think that technology is also giving treasurers the time required to think more strategically as well. If you're automating lots of those different manual processes that have traditionally existed within Treasury, you can free up time for that more strategic thought. For example, if Treasury can automate say, its entire payment process end to end. That frees up the team to work on projects that are more fulfilling to them and add more value to the business, such as considering how they can maximize the company's working capital. Yeah, and I think being able to indulge in that more critical thinking rather than manually filling in spreadsheets or copying and pasting data can really also help enhance job satisfaction in the Treasury team. And that's, I suppose, a soft benefit that the company gets as well, in terms of it's actually a nice place to work. You're actually valued and you can contribute and show the value that you can add to the overall business. One thing I do think kind of shines out here is it comes down to a lot to the relationship that the treasurer has with their CFO. A lot of it is determined by the CFO. If you're at a company with maybe a more hands-off CFO, it might be a bit more siloed within the finance department perhaps, and it could be harder for treasurers to show their value if there's not that visibility into the work that they're doing. I was talking to a CEO of a treasury recruitment company about this recently, and they told me a story about a treasurer who they'd been after this treasurer's resume for ages, and the treasurer was like, no, I love my job, totally happy, never going to submit my resume. They really enjoyed their role. They found it very fulfilling. They were getting to do a lot of exciting value-added tasks because it was that kind of forward-focused finance operation there. But then there was a change of CFO at the company, and the new CFO came in and made it clear that the treasurer's job was only to look after the bank balances, and they'll catch up once a week, and that was it. So they immediately sort of shut down that more fulfilling side of the job, and that had a profound impact. So the treasurer did actually then immediately hand his resume to the recruiter and move companies. So I think that relationship between Treasury and CFO is crucial to actually nurture that strategic side. And if treasurers can establish that good communication and kind of honest transparency with their CFO, that can go a long way in supporting that push, I think.
Well, that was a really insightful perspective, Ben. This greatly enhances the value of the conversation. Next up, let's delve into the second story, which focuses on the UK pound unlikely to regain its pre-Brexit levels. The UK pound should rally against the US dollar and the euro over the coming year. Still, it is unlikely to reach pre-Brexit levels again anytime soon, according to Kamakshya Trivedi, head of Global Foreign Exchange, Interest Rates and Emerging Markets Strategy Research at Goldman Sachs Research, in some market analysis published on the bank's website. Goldman Sachs researchers' estimate of fair value is around 1.25 pounds versus the dollar, compared with around 1.45 pounds just before Britain's voted to leave the European Union. If you are going to have a big disruption in the trading arrangements with one of your largest trading partners, which is what Brexit included, there is going to be an impact on the currency, he notes. Ben, do you think the pound can regain its pre-Brexit levels? Also, besides Brexit, did the pound's depreciation relative to the dollar because of higher inflation in the UK compared to the US influence the pound's valuation since 2016?
Wow, that is a good question for an economist, Push. But I'll do my best to answer it. You know, as Kamakshya Trivedi says in his analysis, and you mentioned, you know, the £1.25 fair value today. If you go back 2 years before Brexit, it was £1.70. So that's an even bigger drop. That's huge. And for treasurers anywhere in the world with exposure to the pound, that's significantly how they think about, significantly impacted, how they consider foreign exchange management. But particularly for multinationals that are headquartered in the UK, with the pound as their functional currency, that's a massive hit. I think you could make a point about inflation, but I do think the bigger impact is definitely Brexit, because other countries have had inflation. Obviously in the UK it ran a bit wilder for a little bit longer, but it's kind of back down to approaching Bank of England target territory, as we noted by their first rate cut at their last meeting. One thing related to this, you know, in April this year on CTMfile we reported, and this is an example of one of the impacts Brexit's had. We reported on how new physical product inspections on goods ranging from flowers to cheese at UK ports were threatening to incur costs and increase supply chain delays. These inspections were introduced at British ports on animal products, plant products, all coming from Europe. And as part of that system, all imports through the port of Dover and Eurotunnel, so both on the south coast of England, so that's where everything's coming in, particularly from France, will be subject to a common user charge of up to £145, which is about $182 for each consignment, and additional costs for every inspection carried out. So that's just one small example of how Brexit hinders UK trade with Europe. And with importers also facing a charge for each consignment that comes into the UK, irrespective of whether it's stopped for inspection, the UK government at the time, earlier this year, admitted that it will add more than 330 million to annual business costs and add 0.2% to food inflation in the UK over 3 years. So that's just one small example, and it's had that big impact. And, for UK companies exporting abroad, I mentioned bodies like the International Chamber of Commerce, the UK section of that, and also UK Export Finance are quite important to have a dialogue with, as in certain circumstances they might be able to help or at least make suggestions, particularly where Brexit has forced corporates to find a new way back to their previous existing trading partners that's been cut off. So, it's something that I still don't think we know the full picture of it. We still are in the first stage of the impacts of this. And if we're on this podcast in 20 years, Push, we can look back and say, well, the first 5 years were a bit of a nightmare, but then maybe it all worked out. We just don't know. But at the moment, I think it's a huge impact on the pound. And I think the economist from Goldman Sachs Research was right to point to it.
Well, you raised some interesting points, Ben. Let's turn our attention to the third story, which is centered on North American fund managers' concern about increased foreign exchange or FX volatility, the impact of policy changes on currency values, and unpredictable FX market movements because of the US election, according to a report from Miltech FX. As a result, 65% plan on increasing their hedge tenor, extending the period during which they are protected from volatility, and 34% intend to increase the hedge ratio, protecting a larger part of the exposure in business from volatility. Ben, you covered this story for CTMfile. For the benefit of our corporate treasury audience, can you share the notable findings of the Miltech FX North American Fund Manager CFO Foreign Exchange Report 2024?
Yeah, so the report's really interesting. It's got some great data points. And I think, we're talking about concern around the election's impact in the US, and fund managers kind of noting that the impact of policy changes on currency values and unpredictable FX market movements as a result of the election. Almost 2/3, so 65%, are planning to increase their hedge tenor, extending the period during which they're protected from volatility, and just over 1/3 are intending to increase their hedge ratio, so protecting a larger part of their exposure from volatility in their business. So I think everyone's thinking about what this might do to the markets. And in fact, it was touched on in that previous story, in that Goldman Sachs research piece, because the chief economist, Treasury, he also noted that one risk to the UK and the rest of Europe is if Donald Trump wins the US election in November and follows through with his promise or threat, whichever side you're on, of imposing major tariffs. And if that happens, Trivedi said it would be pretty painful for the euro area, and the pound has some sensitivity to that as well. So while it might not be the most directly targeted, the pound would still feel the impact. And a global trade war is never good for a currency of an open economy like the UK. That kind of linked back to our previous story, interestingly. And it is a fascinating time in the FX market in North America. The greenback has been strengthening despite analyst predictions that its value would drop this year. You combine that with, should we say, a heated presidential election campaign, that does look likely to move markets. So it's quite a busy picture for those managing FX exposures. And obviously the fund managers are noting that that's something they're concerned about. But obviously it's something for treasurers to worry about as well. And one thing the survey noted about for fund managers was automation, and how fund managers are thinking about how that can actually help them navigate their risks. And I think that provides food for thought for treasurers as well, mulling how to enhance their FX risk management. Nearly all fund managers are exploring new technologies and focusing on automating end-to-end FX workflows that should not only increase efficiencies but also make their lives easier, and it will also help protect their returns as well from those external factors like the election mentioned. So any scope for corporate treasurers to similarly automate their management of FX should be investigated, and a Treasury department might have a very well thought out process for FX risk management, but if the majority of that process is still happening in spreadsheets, then there's still a lot of manual work required. So there's actually a use case for AI here that I was reading about the other day, which was really interesting, where AI could deliver hyper-automation, automatically capturing corporate FX exposures, and also embed the Treasury policies into that process, so that if the exposure goes above a certain threshold, the system can automatically generate a hedge request to the marketplace. So that's just one example of what's possible today with technology. Obviously, it doesn't have to be AI. There's lots of different tools and systems that focus on this particular process, but I think they could all offer a potential for treasurers, in their review. And a forward-thinking approach to FX hedging is crucial, obviously, to protecting cash for corporates.
Ben, thank you for highlighting the key findings and shedding light on this important topic. Let's shift the discussion to the fourth news story, which is about European payment fraud hitting 6.3 billion euros over 18 months. The European Central Bank and the European Banking Authority have published a joint report on payment fraud. The report assesses payment fraud data reported semi-annually by payment service providers across the European Economic Area or EEA for various payment instruments such as credit transfers and card payments. The total value of fraudulent credit transfers, direct debits, card payments, cash withdrawals, and e-money transactions in the EEA amounted to 4.3 billion euros in 2022 and 2 billion euros in the first half of 2023. Most payment fraud in terms of value was related to credit transfers and card payments, while card payments also accounted for the most in volume. Ben, do you think the security measures, in particular the SCA requirements introduced under the revised EU Payment Services Directive, will lower fraud rates?
Well, I do think that's actually one of the most encouraging findings from this report, is the positive impact that strong customer authentication has already had brought in through PSD2. In the first half of 2023, the majority of electronic payments by value were authenticated using SCA, and credit transfers topped the list with 77% of transaction value secured by that method. Card payments and e-money transactions followed next, 65 and 64% respectively. The benefits of this enhanced security, I think, are evident in the fraud rates. If you look at those in the report, card payments authenticated via SCA consistently showed lower fraud rates compared to non-SCA transactions. And that trend held true across both domestic and cross-border transactions within the European Economic Area, or EEA, with fraud rates for SCA authenticated card payments ranging from 0.013% to 0.017% in value terms. But transactions with counterparts made outside the EEA, where SCA may not be mandated, did show substantially higher fraud rates. I think payment fraud is obviously top of mind in the financial services industry. For example, we reported on CTMfile in May about how Swift is pursuing a couple of different AI-based experiments to explore how that technology might help combat cross-border payments fraud. They have a couple of pilots, one where they're enhancing their existing payment controls service, which helps banks and financial institutions detect anomalies that could suggest fraud. And separately, Swift have also convened 10 financial institutions to test how it can use advanced AI technology, there's that buzzword again, to analyse anonymously shared data from different sources in a way that will strengthen, hopefully, the global financial system. And of course, banks are working individually on their own fraud prevention measures as well. But treasurers need to remain vigilant, and I think encouraging a culture of people being able to come forward if they identify something that looks suspicious about a transaction. Any transaction is really important. So if you're a Treasury analyst, say, and you get an email from the CFO requesting an urgent transfer that comes in at 5 to 5 on a Friday afternoon, use their known contact number, not anything from the email, and just call them and confirm it, because the CFO should be delighted either way if you're checking. Either it's a fraud and you've alerted it, or you're just, you're being vigilant, and that should not land you in any trouble. So it's kind of that culture and education is really important. Being risk averse, it kind of needs to be constantly communicated and educated among all staff that have any access to corporates' payment systems or bank accounts. It needs to become like a muscle memory. You need to train it and keep training it. Threats are going to continue to evolve as well, so that's why it's important to keep an eye on the ball here and make sure that you're protected as best as you can be in your Treasury department.
Those are wise words, Ben. Finally, what is your choice for the biggest or most important story of the past week, and why?
Well, I just think I'd go back to our top story today, where treasurers have influenced companies enjoy revenue growth and financial stability. I think that's an incredibly affirming statement for treasurers to have. That relationship that I mentioned with the CFO is so important. It might doesn't have to be a serious amount of in-work meetings. You could, maybe you have lunch with the CFO once or twice in a month or something. Just make sure that they know you and you know them, and you are quite confident and comfortable discussing the value that Treasury can add in terms of, the view of all the different parts of the business, how cash is moved, and just, it might not be that the Treasurer's voice suddenly dominates everything and the company is moving completely where the Treasurer says, but as a sounding board for the business and for Treasurer's own visibility within their company, I think it's important to have that link.
Well said, Ben. And I, for one, look forward to the day where more treasurers become CFOs. Well, we've reached the conclusion of this episode, Ben. We are extremely grateful to you for your valuable perspectives. Many thanks. We also want to express a sincere appreciation to our CTMfile audience for tuning into this edition of the Open Treasury podcast. Please subscribe to our podcast and check out the show notes for links to the articles discussed. Thank you and have a wonderful week. This podcast is provided for information purposes only, and statements made by CTMfile or guests on this podcast are not intended as legal, business, or consulting advice. For more information, visit ctmfile.com.